Welcome to this video series on Ecotopia by Ernest Callenbach. This was published in 1975, and I'm not going to so much get into the storyline of the book, but we are going to focus on the inventions and the processes and the ideas that are presented in this book. There's no real chapters in this book. It's written like a journal, as if in the storyline is this guy, from what I recall, is this guy's a reporter and California broke off. And this place is now known as Ecotopia. The author is from the mainland United States. He's sent on assignment to go to Ecotopia to write about it. And this book is supposedly his journal of what occurred, what he experienced there. And it's his evolution of coming from like the US culture perspective and then going to Ecotopia, which was a breakaway civilization, which is also why we're covering this. And eventually, I think in the end, he mails his journal back and he's like, hey, I'm staying here. This place is great. One of the endorsements for this is by Ralph Nader. And it says, none of the happy conditions in Ecotopia are beyond the technical or resource reach of our society. We can see if some of these ideas have been adopted by society, and the ones that weren't, and if they're good, let's see if we can find a way to then incorporate them.
All right, a much better way to describe this book is this is the Green New Deal fictionalized into a story format. Now, some of the ideas are actually good. Some of the ideas are like, why? That's pretty stupid. But the importance of this book is that we can see what they actually want with the Green New Deal, see what it somewhat would look like, and whether or not it's something we want to actually implement all the way. Because as far as I know, the Build Back Better plan has been passed and funded. Not that I want any of it to go through, but if it's in motion as well as Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, some of the stuff in this book kind of gives you a glimpse at what they had in mind. Now, the way they sell it in 2022 versus the way Callenbach saw it in 1975, they may not match up. And many times, the original sell point sounds much nicer than the actual implementation, or as time 30, 40, 50 years go by, they decide to tweak it in ways that you might really think like, regardless, we'll let the material speak for itself. You might want to get a copy of the book just to go along. I pretty much stuck to just the concepts, just the inventions, and the utility, the philosophy. It's pretty good. This is a good review.
Welcome to the first episode about Ecotopia by Ernest Callenbach. This episode covers pages 1 through 10. I decided to cover Ecotopia because Ecotopia is a breakaway civilization, and that's one of the main ideas of this channel. What is Ecotopia? Well, Ecotopia includes parts of Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. As far as characters go, William Weston is the main character. He's an American journalist on assignment to go to Ecotopia to explain or describe what life is like, because apparently for 19 years Ecotopia was closed off from the United States and no one has gone there, and Americans have formed their own opinions of what goes on without really knowing. Vera Alwyn is mentioned as the president of Ecotopia. I'm not sure if his last name is a play on word for all win. Everyone wins. The journey into Ecotopia. It mentions he takes TWA Flight 38 from New York to Reno, and then the Sierra Nevada mountains guard the closed borders of Ecotopia. Ecotopia succeeds from the USA apparently because it mentions secession attempts around the world. Biafra from Nigeria, which was a failure. Bangladesh from Pakistan. Belgium dissolved into 3 countries, and Ecotopia's secession partly modeled on Quebec from Canada. I didn't even know Quebec seceded from Canada. Now I do. You can make fun of me, but I know now. It mentioned that the USA suffered shortages of the following after the secession, and that was of fruit, lettuce, wine, cotton, paper, lumber, and other products. The breakaway civilization prohibitions of entering. The main character is the first American to enter Ecotopia since its independence 19 years prior. All planes, including international, are prohibited from crossing Ecotopian territory on grounds of noise and air pollution. They rarely allow cars with combustion engines and exhaust. Concealable weapons are prohibited. Cultural things. Misconceptions of two societies become created about each other because when there's no communication or interacting, you just make things up or you make assumptions, prejudices without really knowing. Sometimes we believe just because someone's from another society that we shouldn't act friendly towards them. At least that was the case in 1976 when this was published. We all have ethnocentric perspectives thinking that our society is the best because we live there. A little interesting historical tidbit was that Americans were embarrassed to recycle in 1976. It seems to be part of life now, and you're not a wimp for recycling anymore. But I do even remember as a kid that recycling was kind of an embarrassing thing to do. But the Ecotopians were good with it, and we are now as well. Ecotopia uses the metric system. The main character notices that Ecotopians don't paint much or wear fashionable clothes and prefer the earthy look. People have more time on their hands, and since there is no criminal activity, they are able to get into deep and engaging conversations of which people may yell at each other, and it's okay. It's culturally acceptable to get excited and raise your voice. If you encounter an employee, they expect to be treated as a human and have a conversation and interaction instead of just being a ticket dispensing machine. The main character, the journalist, also noticed that women make eye contact with you as you walk the streets. I think he was from New York, so it was their custom not to look each other in the eye, but in Ecotopia, it was normal. The trains in Ecotopia operate by magnetic suspension and propulsion. You feel virtually no movement at all, no rumble of wheels or whine or vibration. It enables better conversation. It feels like you're flying. The trains had comfortable blankets and other things to relax on instead of chairs. You could smoke marijuana on the train. They had plants on the train. The environment was to make you feel like an actual guest, not a paying customer. Recycling. They had bins marked MGP for metal, glass, and paper. The Ecotopians recycle all the time without exception habitually. Ecotopians pride themselves on recycling and reusing. The main character noticed that there were no advertisements, no traffic, no billboards, no gas stations, and no telephone booths. Ecotopian economic policy. Diversification and decentralization of production in each city and region took temporary advantage of the Boeing facilities to help build the new national train system. They measure their money or their currency and social cost per person, per mile. At least that's what I gathered, because when the main character asked how it was all financed, the Ecotopians just laughed. Welcome to the review of Ecotopia by Ernest Callenbach, Episode 2. This episode covers pages 11 through 25. In the section entitled The Streets of Ecotopia's Capital, it mentions that San Francisco is the capital. There's no gas cars, and because of this, there's considerably less noise. There's more plant life decor. Creeks and other water is allowed to flow naturally and freely, which at the time, I guess dams and other ways of making nature not flowing freely was discovered that this may not be the best way to engineer our geography. Potholes get planted with flowers. Even though people are unoccupied, there is no crime, or little crime. I have a note here, makes mention of protection of vehicles from place to place, but I don't remember what that even means, and that there were not many signs. The mini bus system. Pavilions that were already there are now bus stops for minibuses. They are driverless, they travel at 10 miles per hour, there's no fare, and the upkeep and the operation is paid for via taxes. Bicycles. Bicycles are all over the place, and people use them for light travel. They are a free-for-all, meaning there's bicycles everywhere, nobody owns them. You use it, you ride the bike to wherever you want to go, and then you leave it there, and night crews return them to the anticipated location for use the next day. The main character asks, are they concerned about bicycle theft? And they said it's actually cheaper to lose bikes than provide more taxis or minibuses. Ecotopia life. Buildings. Skyscrapers are now apartments. They've been repurposed. These buildings also have inside of them nurseries, grocery stores, restaurants, shops, offices. Ecotopia behavioral customs. They spout statistics and always refer to social costs. People don't keep pets. They just enjoy them in their natural habitat. They turn the lights out at night. And the work week was reduced to 20 hours. Ecotopia Future Tech. It made mention of a picture phone, which I guess is our modern day video conferencing. Scientists are forbidden to accept payments or favors from public or private for their advice, and this avoids corruption of getting paid off. And I think even to this day, people don't realize that scientific advice about food, about medicine, pharmaceuticals, and whatnot are sometimes corrupted and paid off. Food, sewage, and stable states. There was a lot of attention paid to this section and describing it and defining it. So the country's food cycle, stable state basis, all food wastes, sewage, garbage. They had to find a way to recycle it all. And it's to all be turned into organic fertilizer and applied to the land where it would again enter into the food production cycle. 99% waste recycled was the goal. The previous sewage system was seen as a disposal system, not recycled, but dumped into rivers and oceans. This practice is dangerous to the public health and the life of water creatures, and also it is wasteful and unnatural. Sewage practices of the past are now considered criminal in the present day. Animals roam free, there's no manure buildup, there's a national system of sludge dry, natural fertilizer production, and in 7 years, they believe they will be able to dispense with chemical fertilizers entirely. Sewage recycling involves garbage composting, reliance on novel nitrogen-fixing crops, and methods of utilizing animal manure and crop rotation. Food. Food is grown for nutrition and taste in Ecotopia, not to look good or package well. Microwave ovens are illegal in Ecotopia. There are no processed or packaged foods. Their literature implies that soda drinks were a plot against mankind and were responsible for 10 billion tooth cavities. They fixed the responsibility on producers instead of the consumers. Some of the stuff that we've looked at has actually been incorporated into our lifestyle now, and you have to keep into context the time period this book was published, 1976. But you could also see how other aspects have not been implemented yet, and that's a little frightening. And in some cases, we may have even lost the message over time. So as we go through this material, keep the historical context in mind in situations where you might be thinking, well, no duh. And remember, the goal of this video series is to cover the ideas, the concepts, inventions, and thoughts of Ecotopia and reflect upon it over 40 years later to see where we've gone right and see what areas we could still improve upon. This is a review of Ecotopia by Ernest Callenbach, pages 26 through 59. There was a question on a previous video from a German student trying to learn this, I suppose, in English and is having difficulty understanding. So how to understand the Ecotopia book is this is a fish out of water story. So it's when cultures collide. A fish out of water is a writing technique in order to compare and contrast opposing cultures or differences. So in this particular book, the main character is an American reporter and the first journalist allowed into Ecotopia since they broke off from the USA. In the book, California, part of Oregon and Washington, I think there was like an earthquake or something, they break off and they start their own independent country. And they keep, I think, all other cultures out. And so since it's been many years for this new culture to develop, they've developed their own culture based on liberal progressive principles and environmentalism. And that's kind of generalized, but that's pretty much, it's based on a form of environmental communism, hippie communes, and progressive liberal customs. The book compares and contrasts the two ways of life, the one living in America with our customs that we think are just the way things are, with the way Ecotopia designed theirs. Many of their customs are better in some ways and compromised in others. It's a compare and contrast novel to get you to question your own customs. And it's fairly objective. It's not slanted either way. I hope that made a little bit more sense. Let me know if you have any additional questions. Let's now on to the subject matter. Carless living in Ecotopia's new towns. Describes decentralized cities into mini-cities. There's a tour of the car factory. People live near the interurban train station, all within a 5-mile radius. Vehicles are called electric traction units. Apartments are 10 to 15 rooms for communal living. People like to live together instead of having individualized houses. It's quiet, but there are people, and the main character was impressed at how quiet it was. from the lack of like the city sounds of cars and machines and construction. Not many people wear watches. They embrace that humans are animals and encourage the beast within. And I guess this is described in opposition to civilized manners. So people would sleep like a cat or, not be all proper because it's not natural in their view. One of the characters makes mention that the United States allowed the science establishment to take over science, and he didn't think that was a good idea. The guy was right. Society is designed so humans are rarely alone. They think that humans are social creatures. Social gender roles have been neutralized verbally, but women still appear feminine and men still appear masculine. The mini-city name here is named Aviso or Aviso. The population is 9,000, and they live in balance with nature. The unsporting life of Ecotopia. So we'll look at these buttons first. No contact sports like the ones played in America, such as football, NFL football or American football, baseball, basketball, or hockey. But they do have a physically fit society because people have to walk everywhere. Nearly everyone plays a sport, just not the contact sports. They have like swimming and boating and things like that. There's no grades like in America, such as kindergarten through 12, K through 12. All waterfront property are water parks, and they're equivalent to pennant games like NFL football or college football and baseball are what they call war games. And it's not described what war games are. I guess it's going to be revealed later on, but it sure made me think of the Hunger Games. So kids spend more time outdoors in school and go on expeditions and learn how to hunt and fish and survival skills, and they work ecologically with the environment. Kids learn much about plants and animals so that they could spot the berries that you could eat and the ones that you can't. Public boating, fishing, and swimming were permitted in lakes that had formerly been enclosed in fenced, guarded private developments. So the property of rich, wealthy people's estates were confiscated, seized, and made public because they were thinking, why should just one person get to enjoy all of this beautiful, exclusive property? It should be enjoyed by all. And then here I have again, war games is the ecotopian sport that replaced American contact sports. No one talks about it though, and it reminds me of the Hunger Games. So later on in the book, I'm guessing it'll be revealed, but man, what if it is like Hunger Games? Wouldn't that be weird? Ecotopian television and its wares. Ecotopians don't like technology because of its impact on the environment, but they do use TV more than Americans do. And this is in 1975 terms. So instead of broadcast television, they have cable TV. So they ran wires throughout all of Ecotopia. And while cable TV, universal cable TV is normal in present day 2017, it was rare in 1975. They use TV instead of TV using them. So they actively use it instead of passively using it. They phone into government access shows and communicate through the TV and actively participate in their government. So they actually like dial in during like a public access and complain or chime in. They see objectivity as a bourgeois fetish, and they prefer you to state your position and let it fly. So, don't try to conceal and disguise your true agenda. Just be yourself and say what you got to say. You don't need to sugarcoat it. Advertisements and commercials are non-sensational and functional, meaning like our commercials are sensational and they appeal to your emotion, whereas their commercials are functional and appeal to the function, which is the opposite of the way they behave. And kind of in our society, we behave functional and enjoy sensation on our television, and it's just the reverse for Ecotopia. Ribbon cutting ceremonies are performed by the people that actually did the work, and instead of bragging in vague terms and acting all upper classy, they speak out about the hows and the whys and explain the design and effort. I kind of wish that's how our things are done. They just kind of talk about the whole project instead of speaking profoundly about how great they are. The press conferences are less formal. TV continued, the press just interviews anyone there instead of special heads of state who are trained on what to say or professional propagandists. The channels don't stick to a central theme of programming throughout the day. It bounces from topic to topic, interest to interest. Ecotopians like to believe the goods that they own are of high quality and are considered art. But there are no guarantees of purchases, so it's important that people know how to repair their items, and before an item is released as a good, they have like a test subject of people that own it for a while to see if they're able to repair it on their own. If they can, then it's made available. Cooperative criticism. There was the egg story where this guy he's having breakfast and he said that the eggs were hard or something was wrong with the eggs, and he complained about it out loud and made a big stink about it. And it said that the waitress didn't try to like calm him down, and she brought him to meet the chef, and then he complained to the chef. The chef was a woman. She felt bad about it. She challenged the guy back. They kind of argued about it. Eventually, and the lady said that she had too much that she was working on to be able to pay close attention to the eggs, and they're like, well, heck, we could get you more help. And basically they act all emotionally. They confront each other about it. They make a big scene, and then in the end, the new eggs get served. The guy eats them, and he appreciates them and enjoys them, and then compliments the chef. So it's encouraged for people to just act out their feelings instead of keeping their feelings to themselves. The Ecotopian economy, fruit of crisis. They reduced it to the 20-hour work week. This doubled the jobs, but halved the income. They live in balance with nature, as we know by now. Pages 47 to 51 describe the nationalization and confiscation efforts and the economy conversion impacts experiences by the citizens transitioning out of America into Ecotopia. The hardships were better handled by the older people. The younger people had a harder time adjusting. The main character meets the opposition to the Ecotopian government in a secret meeting, and they want to become a funded clandestine sleeper cell terrorist group to overthrow Ecotopia or disrupt it, like in other CIA coups. Pages 54 to 59 are the main character's sex escapade with Marissa Brightcloud and describes the more open sex practices of Ecotopia. Ecotopia, pages 60 to 77 review. In Ecotopia's big woods, Ecotopians love their wood. Wood is one of the primary construction materials in Ecotopia. They use it over aluminum and other modern materials. If someone wishes to build a wood house, they must first do forest service and contribute enough to the growth of new trees to replace the wood they are about to consume. This section describes the practice of cutting the trees, the Ecotopians' attitudes towards wood, how the trees are replaced, how the equipment works and why, the work ethic, and the main character describes how visually the whole tree chopping was reminiscent of the Old West. One of the things that they kept in mind was with their methods, they used their methods to protect the forest floor and provide habitat for creatures with some of the dead trees. So keeping the forest floor intact was important to them. And as I said, this section discusses the Ecotopians' attitudes towards wood. They love the wood, they smell the wood, they touch the wood, they taste the wood. They're like connoisseurs of it. They really love their wood. The journal entry. If you haven't figured this part out yet, when it's written in cursive or in that italics, it's his journal entry. It's not the actual articles that he's writing for the newspaper. So in this journal entry, it's more of his encounters with Marissa, the behaviors of his that she approves of and disapproves of. Pretty much any of his business-related, corporate-related, work-related behaviors that are like robotic or structured and disciplined without emotion and humanity, she disapproves of those. One of the characters, the main character, is friends with is named Bert, and he describes the generosity of him as well as the other inhabitants, and he ponders, maybe it's their economy of biological abundance that gives them their generosity. Which, if you follow this channel, I'm always talking about abundance and the end of artificial scarcity. And in Ecotopia, they seem to focus on abundance and not on making everything scarce. So the economy of biological abundance that gives them their generosity. When you have a lot of stuff, you could be generous. And then there's more foreshadowing to the shocking war games. And then the Ecotopian counterintelligence confronts the main character about his interaction with the underground resistance from a previous section and tells him to not transmit their message. Decline without fail? The Ecotopian Population Challenge. Ecotopia's population has been on a slow decline for 15 years. And the reason was not because of abortion or infanticide, but humane measures. After secession, the Ecotopians adopted a formal national goal of a declining population. They agreed that some decline was needed to lessen pressure on resources and other species and to improve the comfort and amenity of life. Reasons for population decline in developed nations: persistent inflation recession, relaxation of abortion laws, increased recognition that additional children in a highly advanced industrial society could be more of a burden than an advantage to a family. The reverse of the situation in agricultural or less advanced societies. 3-stage population reduction program. Stage 1. Massive educational and medical campaign aimed at providing all women with knowledge of birth control devices. Abortion on demand was legalized and widely available. Deaths were 1/10 higher than births. Stage 2. Radical decentralization of the country's economic life. National taxing and spending was discontinued. Local communities regained control over all basic life systems. This empowered people to have control over the decision-making of their environments and the effects of the decisions they make on how they want to live, what it meant for population levels and distribution. Cities began to disperse into the countryside. Many cities emerged interconnected to others in little satellites. Stage 2 continued. Cities with 10 to 20,000 people with satellite mini-cities to make a total of 40 to 50,000 people were said to be ideal. Medical services were dispersed. Instead of massive hospitals in the city centers with massive lines, smaller clinics, hospitals, and aids spawned up everywhere, focused on the area and the needs of the area, instead of one size fits all. Schools were broken up and organized on a novel teacher-controlled basis. Agricultural, fishery, and forestry enterprises were also reorganized and decentralized. Large factory farms were broken up, replaced with commune and extended family farms. These adjustments helped ease overcrowding. Population dropped by about 17,000 people. Stage 3 was watchful waiting. Abortion costs have fallen further, and use of contraceptives now seems universal. And the contraceptives were female-controlled. There's no male pill. Population drops around 65,000 people per year. The total population started at 15 million and is now 14 million. The declining population provides a substantial annual surplus per capita and helps account for the vitality of ecotopian economic life. Future population concerns from depopulation. The population declines at 0.3% per year, and it continues to decline. And they do have concerns over the USA trying to reclaim its land if their population got too small that it could be taken over. People in Ecotopia hope that the United States will start declining their population as well. Their view of the proper population size should be what the Native Americans' population was, less than 1 million for the whole country. They plan on continued reorganization into mini-cities and dispersion into the countryside. And it said that they're going to make the trains free so that people can utilize city amenities but still live in the countryside. They have a focus on surplus, not shortages, and thus reducing the population ensures more success for a surplus. Too many people and you have a shortage. Definition of family. The nuclear family is diminishing in Ecotopia. A family now means a group of 5 to 20 people, some related, some not, who live together. Not only are eating and household duties shared, but also the raising of children. Men and women participate equally as far as time spent is concerned. Women's rights in Ecotopia. Women have absolute control over their body. They hold responsible jobs, receive equal pay, and control the survivalist party. Women select fathers for their children. No Ecotopian woman ever bears a child by a man she has not freely chosen. Mothers have the final say with the children. Godparents. Children are surrounded by multiple godparents from their families. Ecotopian old people do not live alone. They play a role in childcare and education. Super eugenics not practiced in Ecotopia. The following are not practiced in Ecotopia, but are mentioned in the book, and I mention them here as a throwback to a previous era. Selective breeding, cloning, gene modification to create a Superman race, and Ecotopian scientists do not like this discussion. They prefer to just have natural lives and natural bodies and natural lifespans. Journal entry, pages 73 to 77. Ecotopians are mad at the news of air pollution coming over to them from another country. This time it wasn't the United States, it was either China or Japan. But it says that they often blame the United States. But in this case it wasn't. The main character moves in with the Ecotopians. And when the main character enters the workplace, the Ecotopians were upset with him in the workplace because he was hurrying with the dishes and not behaving leisurely. They essentially teach him to whistle while you work and enjoy it. Not in those words, though. But they were saying, hey, if you're working, let's have a good time, let's relax, let's not take this too serious, let's enjoy it. And then there was more encounters with Marissa, comparing her free animal spirit to the American women he knows. That they didn't have that same freedom that Marissa had. The main character has an encounter with her anti-American brother who is protective of her, and she explains it as a relic of the family past when women didn't have independence. So in a way, he was kind of behaving like an American, but he was anti-American. Ecotopia, pages 77 to 97 review. Savagery restored. Ecotopia's dark side. So this describes the war games. And when I read war games, I thought of the Hunger Games, but they're not really the same. The participants of the war games were men ages 16 to 30, 25 men on each side, and they pretend to attack each other with spears, but they don't really hurt each other. So it's kind of like as a kid, you grow up playing guns, but you don't really shoot each other. So they all pretend to attack each other with spears, and eventually someone gets hurt. It's all fun and games till somebody gets hurt, and the contest concludes, and the wounded person is tended to. And one side wins and another side loses. So it is a competitive thing, but everyone has a big feast. So everyone gets to celebrate in the victory, even though one team feels the agony of defeat and the other the glory of the victory. But in a way, it kind of seems like the losing team wins because an overly dramatic dialogue takes place in the ambulance with the wounded guy, and the women are there where he tells his tales of sacrifice and glory, and he gets pampered, and he did it for the team. The battle is for us against them and no other reason. They play it to test themselves and to feel fear and to be frightened, and they play on the full moons. And so as I read this, I wonder how much of this is in our own society, including warfare. Is warfare just there to get the aggressive people out of society to do it in a battleground? I don't know. But it does make you think about the societal aspects of our war games that we play. The meaning of the war games. It's a ritual warfare. It's important to exhibit some kind of open expression of physical competitiveness inherent in man's biological programming. Ecotopia hopes to never have real war, but they know that man was not a creature built for a totally and routinely peaceful life. See, you almost wonder if all the conflict is engineered into society just to keep us occupied. Young men need a chance to combat others, let adrenaline flow, to be brave and fearful. Since there are no wars or automobiles, Ecotopians use the war games similar to American football and military service. And there used to be this implication in society back when this was written that cars give you your aggressive outlet for the speed, the need for speed, because it was kind of a new thing at the time still, having a car and the highways. Nowadays, not so much. but maybe for some. Commune versus commune, factory versus factory, us against them, team versus team, this whole divide and conquer. They hold ceremonies for the wounded, and it's like a semi-religious rite to go through the war games. This section is designed to get you to understand the warfare of American life, competitive sports, and other things, and that it's all probably just manufactured to occupy the masses and to keep us busy, and to imply that man has this savage beast within, this primal instinct, this need to kill or compete, which isn't necessarily really there, but it could just be part of trying to add on to the evolution theory that man came from caveman and whatnot. But it could also be that the women are the leaders of the society, and they've identified what they see as a character flaw in man, so they create these war games so that man could get their competitive nature out in a nice, orderly fashion. I'm guessing they feel like they're giving man what man needs. War games for women. Competition for political leadership, organizing work, rivalry over men to father their children. So it says that the women select, and they hold most of the leadership positions. Photography of humans is prohibited. Ecotopians believe photography has a dark magic side of trying to freeze time, cheat biology, and defy change and death. There is a magical side to photography. And when I say magic, I mean with a K. I don't mean magical like magical, but there is some kind of a magic with a K to photography. I've made videos on it in the past. I do enjoy photography, but I also realize there is something to it. Journal. More encounters with Marissa and the retelling of a bad dream he had where he, I guess his subconscious tells him that he's not one of them meaning the Ecotopians. And I believe that the dream was spawned from his encounter with Marissa's brother in the previous section, because he was seen as an outsider. Their plastics and ours. Their plastics come from living biological sources instead of fossil fuels, which means they take it from like living plants, not dead plants or dead dinosaurs. Two major objectives: produce at low cost and in a wide range of types, light, heavy, rigid, flexible, clear, opaque, etc. Produce them with a technology that is not a pollutant, and to make them all biodegradable. And biodegradable may have been a new term at the time. I remember in the early 80s, biodegradable was a big term, and maybe it was spawned from this book, I don't know. The concept of being biodegradable was kind of presented as a new concept here. But I don't know. I haven't been alive before 1979, so I really don't know. Maybe biodegradable is an old term, or maybe it came from this book. I don't know, but it's possible. I looked up the etymology, and it's from 1960. The plastics were used as fertilizer when disposed of to nourish new crops, which would then become new plastics. So the same plastics that you used, you then use it as the fertilizer. It grows new plants, and then those plants become plastics again. So this infinite reuse is called the stable state system, which was covered in previous sections. And it does mention that the Ecotopians are fanatics to describe and discuss the stable state system of Ecotopia. Biodegradables that intentionally die. They produce plastics that had a planned short lifetime and would self-destruct under a certain period of time or conditions. These were used for beer, food, packing materials, etc. So they would use these short-term biodegradables for short shelf life items. They last about a month and then die, usually when exposed to sunlight's UV rays. So you throw it out in the dump and the sun biodegrades it all. Garbage is no longer garbage, as these materials will decay into the soil. So all the garbage just vanishes. Households toss their trash into the compost and use it as fertilizer. We've benefited in our lifetime from books like Ecotopia in that we do recycle now, we do have biodegradables, so this isn't as mind-blowing now as it possibly was back then. Which was part of the point of making this series, was to see what aspects of Ecotopia are used in present-day society. I don't think we've accomplished exactly what Ecotopia did with their biodegradables and plastics, but compared to how it probably was in 1975, I think we've made fairly decent strides. Although not so much in the 21st century, but I think throughout the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. Actually, I take that back. We do have improved recycling in the 21st century. It's more efficient. Metals replacement. Durable plastics replaced metals. Metals became deliberately scarce. Mining and smelting was replaced by the scrap metals industry. There was a nationwide campaign to recycle junk cars. What was once worthless now had value. Bottles and cans were also recycled. But I think recycling bottles and cans has been going on for decades. My dad talked about recycling bottles when he was a kid and using the money to ride the subway to go to Yankee Stadium. Ecotopian durable plastics are used for minibus bodies, extruded houses, coins, bottles, mechanical objects. And so I'm guessing they don't use metals because of the pollution, I guess both of the creation of the metals as well as dumping the metals. The properties of this new plastic. The molecular structures are similar to US plastic, but they are virtually decay-proof except if they come in contact with soil. Scientists build keyholes into the molecules, which can be opened by soil microorganisms. Once unlocked, the whole structure decomposes rapidly. Even large plastic objects will decay if left in contact with the damp earth over a period of time. So even in 1975, they were talking about biohacking. How recycling happens in practice in Ecotopia. The plastics are broken up into easily handled pieces and thrown into biovats. Biovats are huge tubs of a special earthen mush that soil microorganisms find a good habitat. The results are dried into sludge and recycled onto the land. So they turn the plastic into a sludge and then use the sludge as, I guess, like a mud or a fertilizer. Plastics versus wood is a hot topic. Even though Ecotopia has developed this advanced new plastic, there are wood fanatics that still cling to their wood and prefer everything to be created with wood instead of plastics. But there's factions for both. The debate goes on, but both get used. And then in one scene, Bert gets mad at the main character for not collaborating with him on his report about the war games. So Bert wanted the main character to collaborate with Bert and maybe some of the others on his report on the war games. And this is to describe how Ecotopia is collaborative in their work instead of isolated or individualistic. The main character, being from the United States, is very individualistic and just is at a habit, out of his custom, he works on his own. But Bert, being part of Ecotopia, can't understand why the main character would want to work on his own, or was insulted that the main character didn't collaborate with Bert on the writing. Then the section goes on where the main character compares the life of his children in New York versus what it would be like in Ecotopia. And he describes kind of like an aristocratic life in New York, in the city, where they do get all the comforts and they have all these things, but they don't have the real life experience that is required out of the survivalists of Ecotopia. Pros and cons to both. Bird suits. The author describes the bird suits that he saw and describes their functionality. When it rains, the surface layer cotton fibers swell and lies so tightly together that the rain runs off of it. When it's hot, the inner layer fibers unkink and trap less air, thus allowing faster escape of body heat. In the cold, they curl up, trap more air, thus keeping body heat in. So this outfit, it responds to any of the environmental factors, the weather factors that are happening. If it's raining, the water flows off of it. If it's hot, it breathes. If it's cold, keeps your body heat in. And I remember in 8th grade, in the kind of early 90s, there was a lot of talk of clothes that adapt to the weather situation. And with air conditions built in or heaters built in, or using your own body heat to cool or keep you heated. And that clothing still hasn't really materialized. It has in ways, but if it has, it hasn't been spoken about the way it was spoken about in the early 90s. I'm still waiting for these clothes. Ecotopian sayings. Bicycles are preventative transportation, meaning that they prevent heart attacks because you're always physically fit. And it talks about the economics of a heart attack and how they want to prevent the heart attacks because poor health affects everybody economically and in other ways. We don't think in terms of things. There are only systems. Yeah, they've made the world safe for autos and impossible for people. The journal entry described their money. There's no leaders on it, no dead presidents, and people don't really take it serious. It described their beds, their habitats, and all the various types of beds that they have. And it was saying that there aren't many bed boards or bed frames. Marveled at the quietness and the soundproofing efforts. Refrigerators are silent and they're powered by methane from the septic tank. There are no dishwashers. They make way too much noise. And then it goes on to talk about how Marissa tells her family members of their relationship, of the main character and Marissa, and he gets upset about it. And she explains that they're part of her life, and so she wants to share her life with others, and it helps her understand herself by having conversations. And in this situation, the main character finally gets like the moral high ground by kind of implying to Marissa that, you know, she's throwing him into their customs and ways without considering his feelings and his customs, and that his customs matter as well, even though they're not theirs. And you know, they were kind of trying to show how much better their customs are, and that, you know, throughout this time it was up to him to kind of learn their ways. And now he kind of was able to flip it on them to say, well, hey, you know, I have my ways of life too, and you should respect mine as well. But the group does want him to participate more instead of working in isolation, kind of like with Bert in the previous scene. More of this collaborative environment versus the individual environment. And that is kind of like the communism versus capitalism argument anyway. Women in power, politicians, sex, and law in Ecotopia. The Survivalist Party, the party of Vera Alwyn, the chief of state, the president, is a woman-dominated organization, but it does have some men. The policies of the party are basic cooperation, but from a female attitudes, female interest point of view. The opposition party are the progressives, which is pretty amusing because it's like two factions of the Democrat Party against each other. So it's like a full liberal utopia. The Survivalist Party and the progressives. Can't go wrong. The Independence story. The Independence Revolt came about when it was discovered that gerrymandering of the vote to reduce women's vote by half, and then when it was backed by Washington was found out, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and the Survivalist Party won the elections. This section discusses how the reorganization of the country, city, and counties were done. Survivalist Party meetings characteristics. They open with a voicing of concerns. It's not formal. There's a gradual ventilation of feelings. There's no Robert's Rules of Order, no motions, no votes. A formal ratification finally does get done, and the meetings are enjoyed. So this is how meetings would be if women were the decision makers and the politicians. It's kind of cute. Ecotopian crimes. These are crimes that are crimes in Ecotopia that aren't necessarily prisonable crimes in the United States, but in Ecotopia, you will get locked up for the deliberate pollution of water or air, white-collar crime, embezzlement, fraud, collusion, assault, and murder are rare. And then things that are crimes in the United States that are not a crime in Ecotopia are prostitution, gambling, and drug use. So wrapping up, this section described the transformation process of polluting corporations and the methods they used to get around the rules, which then led to the prohibition of pollution and like by law, and then how the companies became clean and the laws passed to prohibit the pollution. And this effort is done in present day through the discussion of global warming and different environmental treaties. And if you want to see what the end game is, just read Ecotopia and see what they want. I mean, do you want a world without cars? Do you want a world without factories to produce the goods that you have? Some of you may. But would it be fair to the rest of us that like everything else? But then is it fair to the environment to continue polluting? And then the chapter finishes with a journal entry where the main character goes to a fair and has a threesome with some 22-year-olds. All right, let's whip out Ecotopia, see where we are at this point. It's around page 97. We left off workers' control, taxes, and jobs in Ecotopia. And I think we'll take it up to, no, we'll go past this chapter. Yeah, a little bit further than that. So we're on 97, and we'll go up to 118. So we'll wrap it up on page 118. We'll cover all these pages here. So that's about 20 pages. Ecotopia Review, pages 97 to 118. Workers control taxes and jobs in Ecotopia. Ecotopia has a mixed economy. After revolution, there was a flight of capital, much like in the Cuban Revolution. So therefore, nationalization of farms, factories, and stores happened, and it was rationalized as those who had been working in the organization owned it. Seizure of property. There were laws formalizing the forfeiture of property by owners. Confiscatory inheritance taxes were legalized. Ecotopians cannot inherit any property. Taxation in Ecotopia. The corporation tax. It's a tax upon production of enterprises, including individual craftsmen. It's based partly on net income, but also partly upon turnover or gross income. Communities and cities levy the tax, and limited powers are delegated to the regional or national level. All taxes are fundamentally a means of the government seizing a share of economic output and putting it to publicly determined purposes. The seizure should be simple, understandable, just, and open to public view. Tax returns are not confidential. No personal income, sales, or property taxes. There's a land tax that encourages concentration and compactness, and no other taxes because they could promote divisiveness. So they basically pay a corporate tax on production of their enterprises, a land tax, and nothing else. There are no super rich. Artists, scientists, and some doctors have slightly higher incomes. The most the system allows is lucky producers the chance to retire and live off the interest their profits can earn from the bank. All employees are partners in business. You can't just set up a business, offer wages to employees, fire them when no longer needed, and pocket the profits. All ecotopians who join an enterprise now do so on the same sort of basis as our high executives. Enterprises behave like capitalist enterprises, competing with each other, and seek to increase sales and maximize profits. They have to find ways to navigate around all of the ecological regulations. Group ownership puts limits on endless expansion. The practical maximum size of a joint ownership firm seems to be fewer than 300 people. They discovered that beyond 300 people, they then begin to break down into bureaucratic, inflexible forms and lose both their profitability and their members who seek a more enjoyable environment to work in. So what about when a popular product sells? So a great deal of money was made on the example of the bird suit. You'll recall the bird suit invention. So they took in more members and worked even less than the 20-hour work week. They don't invest in their competition because absentee investment by one enterprise or person in another enterprise was not permitted. Surpluses can only be invested by lending to the national banking system, which in turn lends funds to enterprises. So that'll explain why you could only get rich off of your interest from the bank on the previous slide. Small is beautiful. If they get too big, they become bureaucratic and lose profitability, and members will seek more congenial environments. Members consider work conditions to be as important as profits. Members are willing to trade profits and lower wages in exchange for comfortable pace of work or a way that offers better relations among the people doing it. High tariffs keep out imports. Ecotopians pay less tax than the United States. They have a small military. Government and education operate on the free market principle, thus the relative total tax burden is lower. Tax revenues are used by the community governments to support their recycling services, housing, power, water, telephone, medical, police, courts, etc. A pro rata share of tax funds goes to the regional and national governments to support operation of larger scale systems such as the trains, defense, telecom, and research. The government. The Constitution is city-based. In contrast, the United States is rural-based. One person, one vote. No county government. the central government must placate and cajole the local government to ensure continued flow of funds. So the federal structure is put in a position to make decisions that benefit all citizens equally. So the central government has to basically be nice to everybody to make sure that everybody continues to send their money. That's actually kind of more of the way it was supposed to work in the United States, where the government is supposed to fear the people, not the other way around. The social safety net. Ecotopia has a small welfare system since all ecotopians enjoy a lifetime guarantee of minimal levels of food, housing, and medical care. Kind of like what they call today minimum basic income. People work because the money is too abject to exist on, and working provides a lively social life. The old and disabled survive on this guarantee, and it's slightly better than the United States Social Security, the provision trip that he went on. So they visit a store with goods produced by automated factories to government specifications. They sell basic items inexpensively, much like Amazon Basics. The average ecotopian will purchase bread, beans, rice, fruit, and other staples from the store. They still go to small independent shops for meat and produce. There are 3 standardized sized biodegradable containers for preserved goods. Pharmacies. They only sell prescription drugs, and they've removed many tranquilizers, sleep inducers, and cold remedies, and they removed behavior control drugs. Insomnia is treated by treating the social life instead of body chemistry. And instead of making children adapt to school, the school adapts to children. And then each chapter has like a cultural side where it's like his own side story that was going on. And he was talking about interacting with the ecotopians, and they have a hostile friendly act of kind of like breaking each other's balls, I guess is the way we'd call it. But it's a friendly thing. They're not really being mean to each other. I just never heard it referred to as hostile friendly act. Energy from the sun and sea. They closed the oil and gas fired power plants a few years in, as well as some atomic fission plants. They don't like fission because of the dangers and pollution, but they tolerate it for now. They redoubled engineering precautions against nuclear explosions and extended hot water discharge pipes more than a mile to sea. Their seacoast plant discharges are carried in huge pipes made of rigid plastic, which is extruded with air bubbles in it so that it is slightly buoyant. Thus, it tends to float and is anchored in place just below keel depth by cables to the ocean floor. Geothermal. Low cost, no pollutants to the atmosphere, and the small amount of warm water that is the output they push out to the runoff in nearby streams, one of which they turned into a swimming resort that is open even in the winter. So the warm water heats the pool. Hydroelectric installations. These are temporary because they tend to silt up after a few generations and have effects on salmon and other wildlife. Alternative energy, the desired choice. Solar, earth heat, tides, wind, windmills, and these can all be tapped indefinitely without affecting even the local biosphere. Energy research. Direct solar radiation. They use a silvered parabolic mirror about 30 feet across that focuses the sunlight. Since the sun moves during the day, the receptor at the ray's focus must move too, so this odd-shaped device sits like a spider on a web of thin cables on which it pulls itself about, seeking maximum warmth and sending steam through a flexible pipe to drive a generator on the side. Photocells. Pretty much like what is being used on satellites, but much larger. Cell banks cover an area of several miles on each side, perhaps 20 to 30 square miles in all. It's the size of a major airport. Generates enough power for a chain of mini cities, and ecotopian planners believe that in cloudier climates too, such installations are becoming economically feasible. Now, I've heard about this too, that if you took, I think it was 1 square mile, I guess, in 1975, the technology was where it was at then. And then in around the year 2000, I heard that if there was 1 square mile of solar panels in Nevada, it would provide enough power for the entire United States. And then also with the way the photocells were laid out, it said that it didn't harm the natural habitat of the creatures. They would live underneath it, the plants could grow, and it wasn't harmful. The Punta Gorda Thermal Sea Power Station sucks up seawater through a monstrous pipe. Smaller pipes run this way and that, connected to generators and pumps. The system is something like a giant refrigerator running in reverse. Since water can store enormous quantities of heat energy, even a relatively small temperature differential can be made to yield large amounts of power if suitably ingenious heat exchangers are employed. But great quantities of water must be pumped up to take advantage of this principle. Sorry about some of the spelling. The water wheel. So he goes and visits a small cabin which is far away from any power lines, and he wonders how were they enjoying. I think they had a radio. And the water wheel was a small wheel which floats in midstream, suspended from cables, thus avoiding costly and ecologically damaging embutments. It generates 24-volt power, which stored in a couple of batteries is plenty to run the radio, a pump, and the few electric lights needed in a country place where people go to bed early. Heating. Most city dwellings are heated by a system that involves solar radiation stored in a large water tank underground, from which heated water can be pumped through radiators in the living areas. Much of the south walls and roofs of ecotopian buildings are devoted to the heat receptors for these devices, but since they greatly reduce the cost of operating a house and also eliminate the chief need for energy from a central source, ecotopians regard this limitation with affection. The system can also be adapted to heating wash water and the distillation of seawater. Photosynthetic chemistry of green growing plants. This enables a plant to capture solar energy and use it in the plant's own growth. Specially bred plants can be electrically tapped directly. Your garden could then recycle your sewage and garbage, provide your food, and also light your house. So have you ever heard of this? Tapping, I guess, the photosynthesis power and then redistributing it for energy? I heard about it like 20 years ago, but I haven't heard about it since. I think it was even shown in Minority Report in that one scene with the lady that had the plants. Race in Ecotopia, apartheid or equality? Sorry about the spelling. After independence, Ecotopia granted city-state status to the black areas of Oakland and San Francisco and Chinatown. They had their own government. Long-term, they want to be their own country because they still reported back to Ecotopia, much like all the other city-states. Now, some of the differences is that they still have private cars, Scotch whiskey, and other imported luxury goods that are hard to find in Ecotopia. The per capita income is 10% higher than white areas because of longer hours. They're exporters of music, novels, poetry, movies. English is the main language, but they also teach Swahili. And it is believed that black Ecotopians sponsor revolutionaries in South Africa. There are some areas with black people outside their areas, and these are referred to as Soul City and are fully integrated with white people, and they intermarry. And then he concludes with the realization that blacks and whites have voluntarily separated themselves, hence the apartheid or equality title of that particular section. And then, messed up wise, it goes into prison reform. They have flat sentences with no parole. They do not have large prisons. Inmates participate in general life of society and have jobs and pay, and they can still interact with their family commune. It didn't even seem like they really went in prison. They believe this is better rehabilitation, which gives time and opportunity to develop non-criminal modes of life. And many drug and sex offenders were given amnesty. In the previous video, we talked about some of the crimes that were decriminalized and things that weren't crimes that were criminalized. Drug and sex offenses were no longer crimes. Pages 115 to 118. These compare and contrast Marissa, that's Marissa from Ecotopia, to Francine, which I don't know if it's his wife or his fiance from the United States. They're like completely different women with completely different ways of being. It also compares U.S. marriage to Ecotopia marriage and the consequences of each. Ecotopia Review, pages 119 to 132. Communications in Ecotopia, Press, Television, and Publishing. After independence, the media conglomerates were broken up, and they could only own one operation per city. So if you owned a TV station, you couldn't also own a newspaper. And contrast that to present day, nationally or possibly even worldwide, 6 companies own every media, television, newspaper, radio station. A lot of this consolidation occurred after the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Newspapers. While San Francisco originally had one daily newspaper, afterwards there were now 6, and these 6 represented a myriad of views instead of just having one centralized, homogenous perspective. It's now all over the place. There's pros and cons to both. When you have many points of view, you get to hear a lot of new views, but then nobody knows what to believe because there's so many different perspectives of reality. When you only have one point of view, everybody's a little bit on the same page, but you got like a narrow perspective of reality. So while it's great to have as many voices as possible, it then creates non-cohesiveness. But with one, your worldview gets limited. Pros and cons to both. And while you could have one TV station, you could only own one, the newspaper from San Francisco eventually had a national reach. So that means that people across Ecotopia chose to read the news coming out of San Francisco. Magazines. The magazines proliferated, but they do not seem sustainable. I think many magazines are probably and have always been funded by a larger corporation, and the magazines probably are somewhat vanity. Obviously, subscriptions and advertisements help fund it, but if there's too many magazines to go around, there may not be enough advertisers. And I can't remember how they felt about advertising in Ecotopia. Television, less entertaining. What they do show are old films, amateur shows, and comedians. To Americans, the TV would seem dull, boring, because of the less showmanship, and they're more technical in nature. And to understand that line, there was people used to prefer, and this is like at the turn of the century, prefer technical and functional advertising. But then once Edward Bernays and Sigmund Freud figured out how humans really want it, advertising then went to become more appealing to your emotion, appealing to your feelings, instead of being functional. I've always preferred functional advertisements, but the majority of people prefer to have their emotions played with. In Ecotopia, it's more functional, more technical. There's more local programming, but central news is permitted. So most of the television had to do with local situations, but they're also allowing in like a centralized news to come in. So that's like the national news. If you watch the news, the local news, most of it focuses on local things, but then there's a portion that brings in like the leading headlines from the national news. And then there were government channels for political and government affairs. Now, I'm assuming this is happening on just a few channels with different time blocks, because back in 1975, I don't think cable television was around yet. People still would turn the dial to get stations. And I couldn't imagine not that large of a population could produce all this content. But this is how it was described. News reporting and books. News. There were no U.S. correspondents from Ecotopia in the United States, so the U.S. news comes from Europe. The world news coverage is good, especially coverage of U.S. military strikes. Newspapers are print on demand to save paper, and they use various inks. Some dissolve. Some are like short-term, some are long-term. Books. Popular books are sold in kiosks. The less popular ones are print on demand. Amazon.com before Amazon.com. The way the print on demand was described in the book, and keep in mind 1975, it somewhat described the Amazon website. So what you do is you look the number up of the book, so that's kind of like the card catalog system. You get it, then you search. I don't think the word search was known yet, like a web search. Nobody knew that yet. But you would type the number into the computer with a keyboard. The word keyboard did exist. You'd read samples, and then you'd see a price on the monitor. But the monitor was called a video screen. And then you'd purchase, and then it prints. So just like we have now, you go to Amazon, you type in your search phrase, and then it shows you the book, and you get to see samples of the book. And then if you want it, you get to purchase it. So all 60,000 books written by ecotopians are available in this database. It describes how the books are written. The author didn't anticipate the word processor, so it's kind of like a manual. There's parts that they put into the printing press, and it describes the print-on-demand techniques for amateurs. And it made sure to mention that everybody that was involved in the publication, so all the parts, so the printing guy, the paper guy, the ink guy, the distribution guy, the binding guy, all their names are printed in the book. And it's not for modesty or vanity, but to fix responsibility. So to fix responsibility is the ecotopians' focus on craftsmanship and quality. And if there's a part of the book's publication that you were unsatisfied with, you then complain to that person so that they would improve their skills for their next job. One of the ecotopian phrases are decentralize and personalize, which goes against what you would think. A lot of people think this is a communist utopia, but communism is all about centralization of power to the state. This is talking about decentralization, which is impressive and great. So decentralize and personalize is individualism. So there's a focus on individualism along with collectivism, and it's a nice balance. So Ecotopia is the best of both worlds, the best of capitalism and the best of socialism combined into one. And you get to be an individual, but you belong to a collective. So it's the best of both worlds. Ecotopian education surprises. They focus on biology and contrast it to physics dominated. They say that Ecotopia schools are more farm, less prison. U.S. schools, they say, are physics dominated and are there to condition your behavior to be a worker in a hierarchical prison-like existence, cubicles, stuff like that. They focus on projects versus work. So there's no class periods or bells or really homework assignments. The schoolwork is gardening, and there's a practical reason for it because they actually eat the food that they garden for their meals. The philosophy is that work is life and there are no bosses. Everyone comes to a consensus. Instead of everything being dictated by a central boss, everyone's a boss and everyone learns how to come to a consensus on how work should be done instead of one guy just dictating it all. Everyone learns how to read each other and come to the best way something should be done. So everybody collaborates, everybody has skin in the game, everybody has a say. The real life work that they perform teaches them geometry, physics, calculations, carpentry. So instead of just looking at a chalkboard and reading from a book, you actually do the real work. And through doing the real work, you naturally will learn geometry, physics, calculations, carpentry. What's neat is the children get to utilize the workshop profits as they see fit. And it said that they had purchased an archery set. They are given more freedom to explore, and in result, they have better conduct. So it mentions that he was wondering, since they were given such freedom, if the kids were going to be rowdy, rambunctious, and disobedient. But what he found was most of the kids were off on their own, doing their own thing, having their own little tribes and getting along just fine and experiencing. Since they weren't confined to a room, they were able to go out and be humans. Now, they do have national exams, and basic reading, writing, and arithmetic are still minimum basic requirements that are taught, sometimes traditionally. Now, this too is very similar to what conservatives want for school. They want reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then real-world skills instead of just staying in a room learning a bunch of stuff that you may never use. National exams, also, I think I think people on the right prefer those over the left. The left seems to hate the national exams because then they complain that they have to teach to the exam, which is somewhat true. But we had exams in my classes even back before the FCAT for Florida and before whatever the national one is, way before the Common Core. But we still got to learn the subject matter we wanted to learn. But regardless, that's how they do it in Ecotopia. And it's just neat that a lot of these concepts, these aren't solely leftist concepts. There's a lot of right concepts as well. It's a nice hybrid, the best of both. All ways are the only way. There's never only one answer except that which is all answers. Schools are private enterprises. Again, that's a capitalistic perspective. Ran by teachers. Teachers own the building, the land, and the operation. They are free to use any philosophy they wish. Parents are free to send their kids wherever they wish. So there's competition to have the best school. Crick School has 125 students. The Crick School is the one they use in the example. That's the one he visits because he's a reporter. So he's reporting on Crick School. Crick School is named after Crick from DNA, the guy that conceived the DNA. And there was 10 students per class that he observed. They recognize that your abilities are gifts to be shared, and excellence is celebrated, but they realize that all people have varying talents. So while one kid may not be good at this, he may be good at this, and everybody has their own gifts to bring to the group. There's healthy competition, but not harmful competition. So they don't stifle competition. They realize that competition is an important part of the human spirit, but they don't put each other down. They don't try to make each other fail. They support each other even if they're in direct competition. Families with low incomes are given sliding grants, and mandatory education is still required, and the parents pay for it. Because remember, they don't pay tax for education. They only pay corporate tax on profits. The average skills of an ecotopian 10-year-old. He or she can construct a shelter, grow, catch, and cook food, make clothes, understands animal and insect life, and has better interpersonal skills. After all, the students all get to constantly interact with each other instead of having to be obedient and quiet in a room for 8 hours a day. Conspiracy theorizing at the campsite. The Ecotopians ask the main character what were the biggest stories he saw that the New York Times suppressed while he was working there. There was a brief discussion of the Bay of Pigs, Pentagon Papers, and then the helicopter war. Now, the helicopter war was the secret war of the U.S. attempted invasion versus Ecotopia. But the Ecotopians stopped a helicopter invasion of 7,000 plus helicopter combatants. They had varying types of anti-aircraft, anti-helicopter defense systems, and they were able to overwhelm the helicopter combatants. In it described what I felt were heat-seeking missiles and guided missiles before they were known about, because I think those were revealed in the 80s. And so this guy it was definitely describing heat-seeking missiles. I'm not sure about laser-guided or remote control guided, but it seemed like that. And then later on, the main character is shown evidence and wreckage of the helicopter war because he's initially in disbelief. He's thinking, well, if 7,000 helicopters were sent to invade Ecotopia, surely I would have heard about it. Surely the media would have talked about it. But he didn't believe it. So there was a veteran of the helicopter war, and he took him to see all the wreckage. And then once he saw it, he had to come to a realization that, wow, I guess I was lied to. And then the Ecotopians are like, look, you see the truth. Will you run a story on it? Will you tell our story to the Americans? Let them know what really happened. And one of the guys they counted and they estimated that 7,679 helicopters were shot down. And then it describes basically a well-regulated militia, much like described in the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights. They go through yearly training. They have great radio communications, an efficient national communication system. There's rumors that they put mines in Washington. I don't know if it was Washington State or Washington, D.C., but but one of the two. And at the end of the chapter, the main character decides not to publish the helicopter war story at this time because he felt that it would do more harm, and what good would it be to bring that up now, a scandal like that, or a cover-up. Ecotopia Review, pages 133 to 159. Living in plastic tubing. They extrude whole rooms of oval cross-section tubing, 13 feet wide by 10 feet high, 6-inch thick walls. And there's a flat floor inside. And some of the tubing options are solid or with windows punched out along the sides. The ends cut off square or diagonal, and no two alike, there are many shapes. And what this section is describing is producing housing on an industrial continuous process basis versus just handiwork. So earlier in the book, they talked about the pride they had in constructing houses from their bare hands and making them out of wood. But here they found a way to mass produce homes or parts of a house at a lower cost, more affordable for all of the inhabitants of Ecotopia if you couldn't afford or know how to construct your own wood house. And so it's an option available for more people, and found a way to make it consistent with their ecological philosophy. And the way to picture it, that said, imagine jet engine cabins bought by the yard and customized. So it's you're buying like these tube cabins, which you can then modify into not however you want it, but however you could twist the plastic. And even though the plastic is not as valued as the wood, the benefit the plastic gives is the creativity and expression for the Ecotopians to do their art. So a comparison of wood houses versus extruded houses. So the wood houses are complicated and expensive. They're also not as flexible. The extruded homes are less expensive, made from plastic derived from cotton, portable, well insulated. There's a variety of shapes possible, inexpensive modifications and additions, easily repaired and biodegradable, and can be added to wood or stone houses. So if you have a house that's made of wood or stone, you could also add these extrusions as additions onto the house. And there's bathroom ingenuity integrated system, which we'll cover. And then it goes on to a section where the manufacturing process is described. The rooms are produced in one molded piece and will easily fit into a section of an extruded home. The bathroom garden integrated system. So there is a space heater in the restroom that is powered by the methane from the septic tank. The liquid byproduct, I'm assuming that's urine, is used for watering the garden. It doesn't specifically say that, but it says there's a water byproduct. Gardens are usually placed near the bathroom. Sludge removed becomes fertilizer. Sludge, so read between the lines on that, describes a heat pump solar heating device integrated system. It's effective with solar rooms, and it consumes no fossil fuel or water and requires only a small amount of electricity to operate. So to take away from this section is taking the waste from your restroom and then using it to make your garden fertile and the ability to water it. So everything is an integrated system, recyclable, finding use for waste and stable states and integrated systems. That's the goal here. House decor. So how do they decorate these tube homes? So lamps, small bulbs, or candles light homes and decorate the floors and walls. The windows are usually kept wide open. Keep in mind, with those 6-inch thick walls, you have a lot of insulation. And therefore, people sometimes walk around naked. Clothing is optional indoors. But if the windows are open, obviously you could see in. The most pleasant home he saw had extruded rooms arranged like spokes of a wheel around a central stone core. So the base of the home was made of stone, but then everything spoked out into all of these tube rooms. Marissa Now, Marissa did not like the plastic extruded homes and was upset that Will, the main character, liked them and felt that they were more American synthetic junk. It was almost as if she was like, yeah, of course you'd like these plastic homes. They're so unnatural, even though they are made of cotton. But this passage, I think the purpose of the passage was to describe how their relationship had evolved into something more than just a fling. And she was now evaluating him as a potential mate. And for her to see that he liked the plastic over the wood, because she was a real tree lover, that kind of like, she was like, oh yeah, typical. But it also hurt her as in she was like evaluating him and thinking like, how could I be with this guy that likes plastic over wood? I also feel like it was subtly implying possession, personal possession. So marriage isn't the same as it is in the United States as it is in Ecotopia. People are free to have relationships outside of their families or outside of their marriages. But Marissa is becoming more possessive of Will, and that's against the character that she claims to be as a perfect ecotopian. You wouldn't want to possess anybody else. Everybody shares, but she becomes more and more possessive of him as the time goes on. Which I don't know if it's the author's way of saying that some of our practices in the USA are just inherent. I don't know. Because it goes on the jealousy when Will sees Marissa with somebody else and then vice versa, even though they're supposed to always be open to sharing. Separation of functions, research and teaching in Ecotopia. So we enter into like a different chapter section now. Ecotopia has attempted to separate teaching from research institutes, and each group has about 30 to 100 members. The atmosphere is playful. They're sitting around with coffee or tea or marijuana. The projects they work on make use of children's construction set materials. Electronic equipment in labs lends itself to games, and the fooling around turns out to generate surprising and useful ideas. So it's a real laid-back, fun atmosphere. They play around, they have a good time, and through the enjoyment, they then come up with good ideas. Instead of being in the environments that we are always in, professional, serious, boring, or just not enjoyable, Ecotopia says, hey, why not have a good time when you're doing it? Why so serious? Tiny groups. They believe tiny grouplets are the source of the most brilliant ideas in ecotopian science. And these groups are assumed to be funded by the government. Now, they measure success if there's a successful project from 1 out of 100 projects. So if 1 out of 100 projects succeeds and produces something of use, that's considered a success. So that lets you know there's a lot of waste or a lot of unsuccessful projects that take place. You also wonder if the author is trying to imply that, yeah, these guys are all stoned or coffeeed up and they're not taking their job seriously. So there's only a 1% success rate from all this goofing around. Because the guy does a lot of subtle mockery. You don't know if he's mocking the ecotopians or saying, hey, you know what? Who cares, right? Money seems to be available for a great range of basic biological investigations, and reorientation of national production technology, which followed independence, was achieved only through massive scientific effort. All right, that's a pretty long, big sentence. What it's saying is that there's money for tiny little projects, little investigations, little experiments, but it kind of implied that there wasn't money for bigger projects. So small little things were encouraged, but the big projects weren't. But he's also saying that at the beginning, the massive scientific efforts were needed, but now that they've achieved those things, now they're just working on small little things. Photochemical mechanism. It mentions one of the successes was the photochemical mechanism, and it could tap electrical energy directly from algae and other growing plants. And this was mentioned in a previous section. But since he brought it up again, I'm going to bring it up again. Picture what he's talking about. He's saying so plants are basically like solar panels. Plants use photosynthesis and turn the sun energy into energy, right? The sun is what powers the plants along with water and soil. And so people in the 70s when this book came out were observing this saying, gee, these plants know how to convert solar power. How can we harness that power? So somebody in Ecotopia figured out how to tap into the electrical energy directly from algae and other growing plants and then use it to power like small items. And then I guess also on a larger scale, if you had a bunch of plants and found a way to interconnect it all and extract energy from all those, you could have larger, like basically plant power stations, essentially. It mentioned that it was developed by two 26-year-olds that were antisocial that had interesting or unique interests with botany and electronics. There also is a natural process that has been adopted to produce chemicals that we obtain from coal and oil. It says that Ecotopians are proud that the only petroleum products they use are for lubrication. It says fabrication on the slide, but lubrication. Fermentation is used to make alcohol, and then they use that for heating and cooking. You almost wonder if this is like the early stages of ethanol. We have ethanol gas or the e-gas, or also converting, took corn and turned that into gas. Maybe this is like the early stages of what became that. They have also developed highly developed plant breeding and plant care, and compares it to the Japanese. They are also trying to understand dolphin and whale language. They have divers that live amongst the dolphins and the whales to learn their customs and to try to decode the sounds that whales and dolphins make. They're also trying to advance solar, wind, and tidal. The lost sciences. So there's some topics that were once, like in our society, are taught at the universities, but they're no longer taught here. And those are no longer taught are political science, sociology, and psychology. And these subjects no longer have scientific standing. And the instructors that did those now teach philosophy, biology, economics, and keep in mind that's ecotopian economics, as well as anthropology. And history is now a popular topic. But it's not your normal history, it's industrial history, which is basically muck-raking pre-independence archives, and it's devoted to the alleged crimes of American industrial leaders and corporations. You kind of see this happening right now with leftist revisionist history, making everybody into a bad guy, the United States a bad country, and all the stuff they talk about now. So Ecotopia survives in present day with that. Student unrest. Students expelled the principal. This is like that reverse world where right now the principal has all the authority. In Ecotopia, the people have the authority. Universities were broken up after independence into separate colleges, each managing its own affairs without a central administration. So imagine that. The students hire the professors. So who they want to learn from, that's who they hire. People seem to attend university because they like the intellectual life and not for practical or ulterior motives. Society is oriented toward experience and activity rather than credentials, licenses, and requirements. And no jobs require credentials or degrees. Achievement, creativity, and inventiveness are highly prized. Courses on video and TV have replaced many in-person lectures, and course curriculum is no longer really a focus. People simply learn whatever they want. Now, this one was a prediction that's come true. We now have distance learning and classes on demand. MIT now has a lot of their stuff on video for free. Now, the students that are on campus, though, they are expected to learn the humanities and all of the intellectual behavior and etiquette of the college degree. One exam is administered at the end of the year, and it's a really difficult exam, but it says that most people do pass, and they really do consume and learn all the information. Because everything is volunteer, essentially. So if you're volunteering for something, you're not forced into it, you're not compelled into it, or you're not in course curriculum with side topics that you don't really feel is necessary. You're there to learn the things you want to learn. Graduate instruction is more like an apprenticeship, and they prefer brilliant short papers are more valued than dull, long, boring ones. Just get to the point. Let us know what we need. I fully agree with this. I'm an anti-obscuratant. Many people are obscurantants where they would write long, dull, boring papers and make it not obvious and use jargon. So I prefer this. Have a short paper that gets right to the point without all the extra stuff. You don't have to fill up 50 pages. You just say what you got to say and get out of there. Make it obvious. Everything obvious makes a better society. Obscuring everything, not my flavor. Ecotopian music, dance, and other arts. Nearly everyone has some form of an artistic expression in Ecotopia. And the audience, if they don't like what you're performing, they'll boo you and hiss you off the stage if they don't like it. Because remember, emotions aren't bottled up. Everyone expresses everything that they're feeling. Nobody keeps anything inside. They just say it. And it's hard to make money as an artist because everybody's doing the art. Plus, nobody really is into the individualized celebrity because everybody's equal. So it's kind of hard to get your name out because getting your name out would imply individualism, and this is more collectivism, the group. And there's no real big name architects. And since everyone does art, it's not as special. So there's no Van Gogh, there's no celebration of individuals because, again, it's a collective. Which I think is an irony that the author was subtly implying, that everybody wants to be an artist, but nobody wants to be an individual. But in order for you to be a successful artist, being an artist is an individual expression. So everybody wants to be an individual in a collective with collective ideology. So it's like impossible really for this to work. And it's almost like a lie to say that you are for the collective when everybody inherently is really for the individual. We say we want the collective, but really greed or individualism is at the heart of everything. Now, I say that, and I'm a very giving person, but I do have my individuality, and I would never want to sacrifice that to the group. I will do everything to make the group succeed, but please let me still be me and don't take my achievements away. Allow me to be me. I am an individual, and I'm probably the best collective. I ensure the group succeeds, but at the same time, I want to be an individual. So, and I'll talk about this at the end. This is the difference between individualism and collectivism, and the goal for everything was told in Star Wars. It's all about the balance and the Force. I don't want to be all the way individualistic. I don't want to be all the way collective. I want to be a little bit individualistic and a little bit collective and find the happy balance. And that is the eternal wisdom, is the balance in the Force. But I do enjoy these ironic, subtle pokes at collectivism, but there's also plenty of pokes at Americanism as well. It's a really objective book. Music is most important. So everybody in Ecotopia has some form of musical ability. Page 146 describes all of the various genres and tempos and styles. I'll let you read that. I didn't feel like that was important to my objective, but page 146 gives you all the different styles and everything that developed in Ecotopia if you're interested. Page 147 describes the debate against electric amplified music. So this also is kind of like poking fun at the Ecotopian way where everything's got to be so pure that they don't even allow amplifiers. But then some people are like, dude, I like the amplifier, man. I like the electric guitar. They want everything to be pure until it infringes on what they like, and that's their music. So then you have the super duper purists where every house has to be made out of wood and no amplification. And then you have these people that are starting to say like, yeah, but come on, we can make an exception when it comes to music, right? So then you get page 148 and 149 describes the war games. He participates in it and gets wounded. So if you want to read about the war games, those are the pages it's on. Nothing there for my agenda. Pages 150 to 153 describe his hospital stay. And basically they treat you very well. And it just shows that your hospital stay is more about nourishing your mental health back to health versus really treating any wounds and whatnot. I mean, they treat the wound, but they feel the road to recovery is more of massages and getting you to feel good about yourself. And everybody gives you positive reinforcement and tells you you're great and boosts your spirits. Hospitals and healthcare, the ecotopian way. Personal experience and care of the nurse is essential. They specialize in massage therapy. Everyone has cradle-to-grave medical insurance, so universal healthcare. Doctors and hospitals are responsible for the community's health. So they can't really rack up the prices. They can't bring in people from the outside to help them get high. They are the highest paid, but they're not high paid. Babies are usually delivered at homes by nurse midwives. There's not many life support systems to keep people alive. People prefer to die at home. There's an emphasis on preventative care, which also was in the affordable health care. It was supposedly the effort was on preventative care. People prepare themselves for death and to be recycled. So that goes with the no life support systems. Many neighborhood clinics provide checkups. And like in present day, now we have a lot more walk-in clinics and urgent healthcare facilities, more than just the emergency room, as well as your primary care providers. No ecotopian avoids getting medical care because of the expense or the inaccessibility of health facilities. And doctors pay attention to psychic state as well as medical injuries. So this goes again to the psychology that your psychic state is just as important as your physical state. They think that if you're mentally feeling good, it'll then manifest itself into the physical. They never went into the concept of death panels. One of the objections to like universal healthcare and socialized medicine is the rationing of services as well as death panels. They call them death panels. The only thing that implies it here is that people prepare themselves for death and to be recycled, and that there's no life support system. So, you're really sick, well, you're out of gas and you just accept death. And that's the problem those that oppose it have most, is that your life is not that important because you're just part of the group, and prolonged health resources being expended on keeping you alive impact the health of everybody else, or impact the resources and waste the resources. Whereas if you just died, it would be better for everybody else. So that's the big anti-socialized medicine, is the rationing of care and the lack of care and the lack of treatments on demand. And as it says here, they don't have much of those kind of treatments. In our society, the high price of healthcare is because of health insurance. Health insurance allows the prices to be astronomical. So if you remove health insurance, the prices would have to go down, because no one could afford the prices that health insurance allows for. Ecotopians are never alone. So he kind of proposes to the reader, does this make them more happy or sad than Americans? Imagine having friends and family around you all the time. Would that drive you nuts? Is that freedom? You're always being watched by somebody? And it says that some people do go on solitude hikes for 3 weeks at a time just to be alone. So the author is implying like, hey, we all do need to still have our individualism, our solitude, time to ourselves, and privacy. But in Ecotopia, privacy really isn't honored because it's the collective, it's the group. Privacy is an individual thing, so it's not really honored. But it's saying like, hey, everybody kind of needs to be alone at some point. I think I'm going to wrap this part out. This video we're going to wrap here because the book changes. The main character changes going forward. So we'll put that into the final video for this review of Ecotopia. Ecotopia Review, pages 160 to the ending. We last left off on this slide. Ecotopians are never alone. I had mentioned about the solitude hikes for 3 weeks at a time, and that's where I wrapped the previous video, and now we will continue. The main character is starting to like Ecotopia at this point, realizing he's liking it after his hospital visit, because he goes in as like an American tourist with American ideas, and at the beginning, he's just finding everything they're doing to be backward or stupid or not the same way that Americans do it. But now that he's been there for a while, he's starting to realize, like, wow, some of this stuff actually makes a little bit of sense. And he's in the hospital because he was wounded during the war games. And that was like his true initiation into becoming a real ecotopian. He participated in their custom, was wounded, and basically shed blood with them. And so metaphorically, he kind of became an ecotopian. He drank the brew that was passed to him. He was one of their brothers. And now he was being treated in the hospital as a war hero. And so like that was his altering, shifting moment. And then as he's about to meet President Alwyn, that really seals the deal. And on pages 160 to 162, he speaks with President Vera Alwyn, and he doesn't convince her to bring Ecotopia back into the USA, and she doesn't convince him of anything either, but she works his mind hard. And he doesn't print all the things that she says to him, but it affects him to the point where he doesn't want to talk to anybody for a couple of days. And he's like, oh, I think what he's discovering is that, wow, while the Ecotopia is not perfect, a lot of what they do just makes sense. It doesn't make American sense. It may not even make economic sense, but it makes human sense. And I mentioned this at the very beginning, not of this video, but of the whole series, that I believe the name Alwyn is like a play on word of all win. Because in my experience of collectivists, they don't like competition against each other because there's one winner and one loser. Wouldn't it be great if everybody wins? Everybody gets trophies nowadays. And I've never in my life talked about the zero sum, but other people are always obsessed with it's a zero sum game. It's a zero sum game. And it's like, just win, dude. You won't care. But so anyway, all win, Vera Alwyn. But this is the turning point in the book is when, and everything was leading up to this. His goal was to get an interview with the president. She interviews him. They finally do it. And at that point is where he changes and starts. And at the beginning, he's rejecting it. He's upset. It's like he's discovering his life is a lie. And as we go forward, he then accepts it. And it says that Vera has excellent like psychological reading ability. And it also, they want to know more about how you feel versus what you think. Because what you think is basically trained into you. What you feel is what you naturally inherently, and that's the whole thing of Ecotopia, is to let your true feelings out. Don't repress your feelings. Don't lie to yourself. Just be who you are and just let it all out. Whereas we're trained to think and have mannerisms and withhold and you know what it is, repress our true feelings. So Vera basically gets into his feelings and basically changes them. And it reminded me of, the whole thing of I want to know what you feel, not what you think, goes to the Jedi wisdom that Qui-Gon Jinn gave Anakin right before the pod race when he said, remember, feel, don't think. Ecotopia, Challenge or Illusion, page 164. The prose, he admits that the social experiments have worked. The air and water are crystal clear. The land is well cared for and productive. Food is plentiful, wholesome, and recognizable because they don't allow all the preservatives and all the other stuff to make food like fake. Life systems are operating on stable state basis and can go on indefinitely. Health and general well-being are undeniable. Extreme decentralization and emotional openness have many benefits. And this is an article that he's writing so the title of his article that is to be published in the United States is Ecotopia, Challenge or Illusion. So he gave the pros and now he's giving the cons. And at this point, it clicks in his head that he's like, geez. And after he gave the pros, and it's almost like you could experience that he's kind of thinking this whole thing through. He's giving the pros and he's thinking like, gee, okay. And now he's going to give the cons, because that's like subconsciously what the Americans want to read. They want to be reinforced that their way is right and the Ecotopians' way is wrong. So he starts listing the cons and he's like, well, Ecotopian industrial capacity and standard of consumption is markedly below the USA, and the level of lower consumption would just be unacceptable to Americans. The political system rests on assumptions that I can only conclude are dangerous in the extreme. Separatism, quietism, tribalism, and there's no one world order. And at that point, when he describes the point that there's no one world order, that they're not trying to take over the world, and at that moment in the book, it's like you feel it click in his mind, and the main character, Will, realizes it's not that bad, and he hates his compare and contrast article because he knew that's how he had to write it, and I think he just crumbled it up and didn't produce it, and then he starts to really question his whole experience because it's starting to shift, and he's starting to realize, wow, the way we do it in the United States may not be the most perfect way. Maybe there are different ways to do things. So then there's more comparing and contrasting, and the pros are it's beautiful, the cities are nicer than ours, meaning they're not dirty, they're clean, and everything has a place. There's great emotional experiences and the great hospitals. And in the book, it explains like the borderline sexual encounters that he has with the nurse at the hospital. The cons, he just says, it's mystifying their economic system, the stable state system, how they calculate undollared costs into everything. So there's a lot of things that have a cost that we don't factor into our economic calculations of things. And Ecotopia recognizes like the cost of pollution. How do you quantify that? Well, they find a way to quantify it and put it into their economic calculations. But I believe the way to read into this part, the way it's crafted by the author, is Will, the main character, is at this point, he's just trying to find something wrong. And now that he's more understanding of Ecotopia, he's having trouble coming up with bad things. And so like it's where he's just like fishing for things. He says, oh, it's a mystifying economic system, just because he can't understand how it works. And so he's just at a loss now. And this is where you could feel it all starting to shift for him, all starting to come into place. And he's just realizing that while he's there to do kind of like a hit piece, there's nothing for him to really hit on that's really bad. There's things that are different, way different, but there's nothing that's terrible. It's not like it's a super bad, it's cultish, but the cult isn't really terrible. And there's nothing really bad to report. And he's kind of thrown off by it. And he's realizing how much of it is actually nice. And he's just like, geez, the economic system is mystifying. They have strange customs here. Yeah. Now on pages 166 to 170, he gets kidnapped, but it's like a friendly kidnapping amongst friends. Like it's not his direct friends, but it's friends of his friends that kidnap him and just kind of hold him over and observe him while he has time to basically rethink his whole experience before because he's getting ready to leave to go back to America, and they want him to stay. And like his mind is so conflicted. He's like, I got to get back because we're conditioned. I got to get back to work. I got to get back to America. And everyone's like realizing like, we know you had a good time. We know you like this place. You just need a little bit more time to realize that you like it. They weren't interested in what he thought, but what he felt. So I talked about that earlier. And after he's fighting it, he's, God, I don't want this. I don't want this. And I want to go home. I want to get out of here. Why are you kidnapping me against my will? Don't you know who I am? And basically, he's like, you guys want to know what I think? And they said, no. We're not interested in what you think. We're interested in what you feel. And then they ask him, what will you do now? Are you going to go back? Are you going to stay here? I probably should have mentioned this in an early video. The way the book is written is it's his articles that he's publishing in an American newspaper, and then it's his diary. So the diary is kind of like the storyline. It's him talking about his personal experiences, and then it goes to the articles. So this part here is an article, and the article is entitled Work and Play Among the Ecotopians. So they have a 20-hour work week, and you can't even tell when they're working or at leisure because work is life, but not work is life in the way we do it. They have fun while they're working. Work is not a chore. Work is to be enjoyed, and they're only doing it for 20 hours anyway. So, and if you make the work out to be work, people get upset. They're like, hey man, why are you upset? If you don't like this, don't do it. So 20-hour work week, and they enjoy themselves, and you can't tell they're working. And there's an example where he says, in the midst of a government important discussion, they'll all go and take a sauna bath, like right in the middle of something really heated or something really important. It's like, hey, let's go in the sauna and think about it. And a beer or marijuana party could break out midday at a company. And because everyone has part ownership in the companies, they don't have the normal worker attitude to just like take what's mine and screw the company. Everybody has a stake. Everybody has skin in the game. So everybody wants their company to succeed. And therefore, when they go to work, it's their company. So they're trying to make it succeed. They're not going to try to be counterproductive. Students have school 1 year and then they work the next and contribute to the working policies. And the benefits of this is so, a student goes to school, gets all this new information, and then comes back into the workplace and introduces some of the concepts that are learned. Because as we're in the workplace, like 10 years in, you lose track of all the new insights and new thoughts that you learn in the education situation. And so they're constantly bringing in students that have just recently received new knowledge. And if it's good, they find ways to implement the policies into the workplace. So it's not like you're just 20 years out of school with stale ideas. New ideas are always constantly coming in. The concept of work and non-work is fading away, along with the concept of jobs as something separate from real life. They enjoy their jobs. And again, it's that blending that work becomes life, but not in like a mind control way, but they're making work fun. They're making work enjoyable. So work is not work. It's just part of life. Just like, we all have breakfast. We all go to work. Unemployment is not a problem because they cut the hours to 20. And so it doubled the amount of jobs instantaneously. Whereas everybody worked 40-hour work weeks. They cut that in half. Now you need twice the amount of people. So it doubled the amount of jobs and everyone receives minimum basic income. I forgot what it's called in the book, but it's basically what we call MBI, minimum. We really don't have it yet, but it's being proposed by progressives of minimum basic income. Some socialist countries already have it. So, but it was mentioned earlier in the book that minimum basic income really isn't enough to live on, but at least it's the social safety net. Everybody gets this amount of money. In our society, if that got passed, all that would do is create massive inflation. Prices would rise by the same amount of money because now there's more money chasing the same amount of goods. It wouldn't work here. But it's a nice safety net. And as automation replaces people, we're going to need something like that. But the greatest concept is cut the work week to 20 hours a week and you double the amount of jobs available. Work and play continued. People love tinkering and fixing, and they stay after work to fix things, and they'll help fix people's bike chains, etc. So like things don't stay broken for long because everybody likes to help each other out and fix their things. And people will even stay after work to fix the stuff at work because, again, they all have part ownership of the company. Everyone helps and takes turns with the work. And it also mentions there's a lot more physical contact and touching than is allowed in our society. So, in our society, we have that bubble, that invisible bubble around us. There, since privacy doesn't matter, everyone's touching each other and how it all ends. Now, over the past couple slides, I skipped like lots of pages because it was all of his coming to of realizing that he wants to stay in Ecotopia and how he's just breaking out of his old mental state. He puts on his like work clothes and his suit and tie, and he sees himself in the mirror and he realizes like, and he's thinking about, he's so, in his mind, he's so conditioned to want to get back to work in the United States. And eventually he starts to think like, what actually is he going back to? So here he is in Ecotopia with 20-hour work weeks, free sex, everything's taken care of. Everybody has fun working. There's nothing really miserable to look forward to. Everything that's miserable has been removed from society. And then he's thinking about getting back to America, being stuck in traffic, being in a cubicle, or having all these social norms that we have to live up to, not being able to express our feelings openly, being serious all the time and professional, and all the things that we have in our society. And he's like, it eventually clicks in his mind. He's like, why have I been trying to get back to that? Like, what is better? Why do I want to be sitting in traffic for the rest of my life when I could be here for the rest of my life? So I didn't document all that because I think it was pretty straightforward. The only thing, if you're a young student reader, the only thing I think you would miss is just how his mind, it's the dialogue is straightforward, but it's him coming to that conclusion where he's finally being honest with himself and truly comparing and contrasting the world that he came from to the world that he's now in. And he's saying like, why do I want to go back to what I was defending? And then, so after the main character, Will, spends the few days in friendly captivity in the retreat, going in the hot tub sauna and thinking about everything through, he decides to stay in Ecotopia and not return to the United States. And he submits his final article and his diary. And he's like, you could either print it or you don't print it. I'm staying here. Thanks for the assignment. So that's the end of Ecotopia. I hope this video series helped you along with the material. There's a lot of things that I missed that I didn't do because my objective was just to talk about the technology, to talk about how to create abundance, how to work with nature, how to find different ways to do things that we do now. And that was my objective. I feel like I pretty much adequately covered that. The emotional side, the societal side, the cultural side, I left a lot of that out because I feel like those parts were pretty self-evident and would retain your attention. So all the diary parts, I feel like, especially the parts of, intimacy, I'm pretty sure those were interesting to read where you don't need my explanation of it. And I just wanted to focus more on the technical stuff. But that's that. That's Ecotopia. It's still a great book. It's still a great read. It's a great fish out of water story. It's a great compare and contrast. It's objective. It's fair. It gives you both worlds. Ecotopia is not perfect. I still would want to retain my privacy, but there's a lot from Ecotopia that we could adopt. And that's the thing with everything in life is that, especially like with philosophy or with politics or with anything, people are always looking for like that one thing to say, oh, no, it's all discredited. And they just, or with religion or with anything, everyone's looking for that one thing that's wrong, or, oh, found something. Therefore, everything is not true. And that's not the way to do it. The good way, an intelligent person, a wise person would take what is good and adopt it. And the things that are no good, reject it. But to just write anything off is bad. So capitalism or socialism. Socialism is far from perfect, and capitalism is far from perfect. So we should find the best parts of both. And obviously socialism is the pretext to communism and whatnot. As I think it's the founding documents say, in order to create a more perfect society. So in a world of actual scarcity, capitalism is probably the best method of organization. But as we move into the post-scarcity world, a new way needs to be discovered. And socialism obviously is not the answer because that is just as old as capitalism. But a new method, once abundance hits, abundance has always been there, but it's been hidden. Once it becomes obvious that there is a Napster for everything, will then need to change things. And all it'll really take to get that to happen is for the free energy technology to finally be admitted, revealed, acknowledged, and shown. Because the major cost of everything is the cost of energy. And that cost of energy is multiplied many times over, from the extraction from the earth to the processing and manufacturing of it to the distribution of it. So those are three major costs that would be eliminated because there'd be no energy cost. And then once that happens, the prices of everything then go down to near zero. Basically, the price is whatever price you put on something. The cost of goods sold will drop dramatically. So if you want to learn more about that, you can look up Jeremy Rifkin and his Near Zero Marginal Cost Society, The End of Work. In Ecotopia, they still do work and they reject a lot of technological advances. So their Ecotopia is a little bit different than what I'm talking about. Ecotopia is just trying to find a way to be completely harmonious with the natural state of the environment and have non-polluting things. And it's a great idea as well. We should try to do things as clean as possible. And free energy would bring all of the great parts that capitalism has provided us, and will do it without the pollution. Because that's the primary complaint against capitalism is the pollution. If you remove the pollution out of it, then what would the biggest complaint be? The unfairness, the greed. Well, if you can produce everything on demand, that takes away the greed, because anything you want, you could instantaneously manufacture at a near zero marginal cost. So there won't be any jealousy of any material good, because you could produce anything on demand perpetually. Because if we're being honest right now, supply and demand supply is a lie, demand is a lie at this point. Supply is a lie because the manufacturing capabilities are there to produce an endless supply of any good. We actually we artificially scarce the production of goods to meet the demand so that prices can remain wherever they're at. But the reality is you could produce so many products that every product can be produced that would exceed the demand no matter what. So supply and demand is an illusion now with all the automation technology. Once people realize that supply and demand no longer are real, or that supply can exceed demand exponentially, then the price of everything should go to nothing. But it wouldn't currently, because you still have to pay for fuel or gas or oil. Once you remove oil, energy out of the system, release the free energy, the cost of goods becomes near zero. So when there's no cost to produce an endless amount of goods, then there's no reason the supply could become anything. And that's where you would just make supply on demand, not supply and demand, but supply on demand. But the price shouldn't be judged on supply and demand, or the price obviously wouldn't be based on the cost of the good. It would be like Napster. You want the MP3, you download the MP3. The supply is available on demand at a near zero cost. The only cost that costs to download an MP3 are three costs. Maybe more. Let's see what we have. We have the cost of the electricity, the cost of the internet connection. But again, the electricity is just provided by the utility company. The utility company has been spending the last 100 years of finding lower and lower and lower cost ways of producing electricity and constantly raising the rate by 3% to please the shareholders. So the cost always goes down. The price seems to always go up, although it's almost a fair price, but not really. It's a fair, you know what I mean? So to do an MP3, someone had to make the music, someone had to record the music, and then at this point electronically distribute the music, and then you needed to have an internet connection. There needs to be a server. But all that you already have anyway in your own infrastructure. It's not like you bought all that just to receive an MP3. So now take the MP3 model and apply that to every good, where you have, if you have no cost of energy, you have to acquire the materials. But if the technology of like nanotech, of modifying matter on demand, like if all the secrets of nature were revealed, the cost of everything will go to near zero. That's all I'm trying to say. And once people realize that, that's when the prices will start dropping. That's when the free energy comes out. And when it does come out, you got to say, hey, what cost did you even have? And who knows if some organizations, corporations, governments have this access and are producing things at near zero and are charging people and are still going on these economic models of quarterly reports. I think we have an artificial supply and demand going on right now. And because of that, the answer is not automatically, oh, okay, well, therefore socialism, because socialism and communism are also based on artificial scarcity, also based on the word economics. It's an economic system based on the delivery methods of scarce goods, or the distribution of scarce goods throughout a society. There is no scarcity once the free energy comes out. Everything can be produced on demand. So no more supply and demand, supply on demand. So I try to take Ecotopia that step further and to find what are the problems, what's the root cause of all problems in our society. And I found it to be artificial scarcity. Artificial scarcity is what prevents, basically, we have poor people, starving people, poverty, and we don't need to have it because we have hidden abundance. Once the abundance is known, poverty will go away. Anybody that's poor will be poor because they want to be poor. And poor really won't be measured on monetary wealth. Everybody can produce a house. Everybody can produce any goods that they need, survival goods, needs, and even wants. So it's up to us to just demand the free energy tech. And once that's revealed, then the biology, the biotech will then be revealed, and then diseases will be cured. You won't need these treatments that are revolving doors where you are basically a cow for the pharmaceutical industry, where you're providing them monthly income by your visits that you always go to. So that's a part of healthcare that we need to fix. But that's all there because there's a profit motive there. And there's a profit motive to keep people not perfectly healthy. So preventative care was a big concept here. If we could find a way to incentivize healthcare to keep people healthy versus benefiting when they're sick, you'd start to see a lot more healthy people out there. Also, wrapping up, I was surprised at how many ideas that were presented are now more part of the political right than the political left. So the left is more of centralization of power, and Ecotopia is about decentralization of everything, like decentralize everything. And that's more in tune with, I would say, like libertarian republicanism and conservatism, and the desire in present day. You have pretty much the left believes in globalism, as do elite establishment Republicans. But conservatives and progressives, well, not so much progressives, but conservatives for sure, seem to really be against the one world order, the new world order, the trade deals. And there are progressives against the trade deals, but they still like the centralization of power. The left is in favor of the European Union, where it's more of the right that's against the European Union, like they support Brexit. And the nationalism, Ecotopia is all about nationalism, which is thoroughly associated with the right presently. And the left is all about internationalism and are against nationalism. So it's a strange shift of these particular things. And the secession, like the Ecotopian is secessionist. The only thing, the tribalism that it talked about, that's part of the left is into tribalism, the right is into individualism, but the secession is now like associated with the right, I guess somewhat with the hard left, they do want, like, they almost want what Ecotopia presents, and that's the secession of California, Washington, and Oregon from the U.S. So anyway, there's parallels. And then also the education, what they presented for education is completely on the right, smaller, private. It's amazing that that Ecotopia suggests private schools that are individualized. So those were neat things that I saw that I did not expect to see. But then again, the cool part about Ecotopia is that it's suggesting that it's taking the best ideas and then adopting them. So it's not to say that the right has it all right, or the left has it all right, or the right has it all wrong, or the left has it all wrong. It takes the positive things from each of the ideologies and tries to come up with a synthesis. The only parts that I think I wasn't into is, and this kind of goes with the Green New Deal, the way the Ecotopians are living is much like what the Green New Deal presents, and that is, no airplanes, no gas-powered cars. It's like turning off industrialization, turning off the advancements in transportation just for the sake of the environment. I don't like the pollution of air travel or automobile travel, but instead of just canceling them, what I'm always saying is, hey, I mean, we know Nikola Tesla existed. We know the Wardenclyffe Tower was destroyed because if I can't meter it, I don't want it. So free energy tech was intentionally suppressed. There's no reason we should be driving gas-powered cars or jet fuel-powered jet planes. They should all be free energy powered. And that was suppressed over 100 years ago. So that's where I disagree with both Ecotopia and the Green New Deal, where they just turn off a technological future because of the pollution. Instead of just saying we reject the pollution, they should demand, hey, where's the tech that makes the pollution all go away? The solution to global warming, and it can be solved overnight, is instead of putting the oil companies out of business, just make them obsolete overnight by releasing the free energy tech. You remove the pollution instantly. It's not even like a gradual reduction through EPA mandated emission reduction. You just turn it off automatically overnight. Free energy, clean energy, truly clean energy, and it's both. It's free clean energy is what I'm talking about, and it's obviously been suppressed. It exists. It's there. So instead of putting people out to just demand that, then your Green New Deal would make sense. So that's my solution. So that's what I don't like, as I don't like turning off tech just for the environmental impact. Not that I want to pollute the environment, not that I justify polluting the environment. I'm saying the environment doesn't even need to be polluted, and we can still have the technology if it's just admitted and revealed and released. Anyway, you can check my channel if you want to hear more of this particular concepts. I thank you for watching. And leave me any comments below, and of any books that you'd like to see reviewed in the future. I can't make any guarantees, but I'll consider them. And what is the biggest concept that you learned that you took away from Ecotopia? What did you walk away with? And I almost forgot the most obvious of all questions. Would you prefer to live in Ecotopia or the United States? Thank you for watching this series, and I'll see you in the next one.